These unsolved true crime stories are scary because even after the FBI reopened these investigations years later, there's a chance that these missing person cases may still never be solved. Number 10. In 2018, Tammy had told her mother, Roxana, that she and Chad planned to drive from Texas into Mexico while he did some work as a power line technician. Roxana remembers telling her daughter not to go to Mexico because she might have a problem getting back into the States without a passport. Her mother had no idea that these would be their final words to each other, and that both Tammy and Chad were soon to become two unsolved cases of missing people that have still yet to be found. On November 9th, 2018, Tammy spoke with the stepmother of her children, and during this phone conversation, she mentioned that she was in Bruni, Texas, roughly 100 miles away from Corpus Christi. She was expected back in her hometown soon, but she strangely vanished into thin air. After a number of days passed without any contact or further explanation from anyone, Roxana reported the mysterious disappearance of Tammy and Chad to the police. Their missing person cases were eventually reopened as an FBI investigation, as was standard for any unsolved cases that potentially crossed south of the border. After reviewing the case files, FBI agents attempted to solve the mystery by examining any security footage that they could find, focusing most on the last known moments of the 2018 silver Honda that Chad and Tammy drove. On November 7th, FBI agents confirmed the car was last caught on camera crossing into Mexico from Texas. They could see that it was packed with an abundance of personal belongings. To FBI investigators, the missing person case seemed like nothing more than a prolonged vacation, and the case was solved as far as they were concerned. But the FBI's biggest mistake during their initial investigation was disregarding a piece of evidence: the November 9th phone call made by Tammy to the unnamed stepmother of her children. If November 7th was when the car was caught on camera entering Mexico, and November 9th was the day that Tammy had said she was in Bruni, Texas, then that means she was already back from Mexico for 2 days before she went missing. That's a strange story that doesn't exactly make sense to investigators, especially when they looked at what happened to them. Sometime during their mini vacation, Tammy had reported the Honda Civic as a stolen vehicle in Mexico. If the stories in her crime report are true, then her driver's license was still inside when the vehicle was taken, and she might not have brought her passport with her. Agents reasoned that it would be quite difficult to get through customs without so much as a license. The strange circumstances of this mysterious missing person case are far from solved. The missing car has yet to be recovered as well, and the criminal responsible for its theft was never found. Police investigators aren't exactly sure if Tammy and Chad disappeared in Texas, Mexico, or someplace else entirely. Tammy's family runs a regularly updated Facebook page for the missing called Bring Tammy and Chad Home. Roxana insists that her missing daughter would not suddenly vanish without a trace from her own beloved children, and wants this mysterious case solved. Anyone with additional information to help their unexplained missing person case get solved can contact the Corpus Christi Police Department at 361-668-2802 and reference case number 181-205-0074. Number 9. This is the strange but true story of Jane McDonald Crone, who on November 13, 1993, visited at least 4 country western clubs in Houston, Texas. Before she went missing, she was seen dancing with the person in blue jeans and a cowboy hat, who called himself David. The 34-year-old married mother of 2 left the club by herself at around 1 a.m., while David partied on. From there, she mysteriously vanished into the cold night, leaving her family, her job, and her schooling behind. On the day that she'd gone missing, Jane went to work at Baker Hughes Tool Company, but she didn't go home after her shift had ended, instead going straight to the clubs that she would mysteriously disappear from later. Her missing car was found parked a few miles from her home, with her school textbooks inside. Her purse and ID were still missing, suggesting she never made it back to the car after departing the club. Jane's husband reported her missing to the local police on November 15, 1993, and the crime story was soon upgraded to an FBI investigation for kidnapping. FBI agents most likely got involved because Jane had potentially crossed state lines and maybe even national borders. Overall, puzzled crime scene investigators found no signs of a struggle, and for many years the cold case seemed no closer to getting solved, until March 7th of 2021. A volunteer helping homeless people in Monterrey, Mexico, encountered a woman with an American accent who spoke fluent English. She told him her name was Jane McDonald, the same name as the woman who went missing decades ago. As they learned more about her story, investigators in Mexico obtained a DNA sample for forensic analysis. Back in the States, the mysterious disappearance of Jane McDonald had become a famous missing person mystery, with news outlets picking up on the recent sighting and even contacting Jane's siblings for interviews. On March 11th, the investigation came to an unexpected ending when the woman's DNA test showed she was a missing woman from New York who'd given a false name. With no further leads, the famous mysterious case is no closer to getting solved than it was in 1993. Decades later, cold case investigators at the FBI still want to get this mysterious unsolved case solved. Anyone with information that can help explain the strange disappearance of Jane McDonald should contact the FBI's Houston field office at 713-693-5000 and the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office at 936-760-5800. Number 8. The mysterious disappearance of 52-year-old James Gordon Meek is a recent missing person mystery that's quickly growing famous because of how strange and bizarre the true story has become. James Gordon Meek is a popular journalist who went missing, and people are asking questions about what happened. On April 27, 2022, an FBI raid was conducted on the top floor of the Sienna Pink apartment in Washington, D.C. Responding FBI agents leaped from a green armored personal carrier to raid the home of James, who has since mysteriously disappeared without any explanation. The famous missing person case has gained popularity for a number of reasons. First, months before his unsolved disappearance, James had abruptly quit his journalist position at ABC. The unexpected ending was highly unusual and came without reason. Second, he was helping to write a New York Times bestseller titled Operation Pineapple Express, the incredible story of a group of Americans who undertook one last mission and honored a promise in Afghanistan. Without warning, he suddenly told the publishing company that he was stressed and needed to quit his research for reasons unknown, which again was a highly unexpected ending to their business partnership. Why the journalist quit his job and his book project remains an unsolved mystery, as does whether or not this has any relevance to the FBI raid. Case detectives are not giving any details as to what their investigation is or what evidence they were looking to confiscate from his DC apartment. Although some stories allege that the journalist is possibly living with his mother, no official statement has come from James Gordon Meek, and months later, he continues to remain a missing person from the public eye. Number 7. In 2001, 22-year-old Marcus Burell lived in Virginia Beach with a roommate named Carl. When his father Gregory last spoke to him, he had no idea that it would be the final phone call with his son, or that his strange disappearance would become an unsolved mystery years later. During their conversation in early December, Marcus had told Gregory that he was worried about giving his social security number to a man that he worked for. Gregory didn't think too much of the conversation until he received a worried phone call from his son's roommate, Carl, on the 9th of December. According to Carl, Marcus had been missing from their Virginia Beach apartment for more than a week. This dark and disturbing mystery is what made Gregory report his son as a missing person. But when he told detectives that his son was known to travel and might be visiting friends out of state, investigators did not act with urgency. When January of 2002 came and Marcus remained a missing person, Gregory called police again to tell them the mysterious disappearance of Marcus was still unsolved. In the meantime, Carl had disappeared from Virginia Beach. The upstairs neighbor, Melissa, noticed some strangers cleaning out the apartment. When she asked what was going on, they refused to tell her the true story of what had happened. Investigators learned that Marcus's drawings, keyboard, and furniture were all taken. About 10 days after his strange disappearance, his car had gone missing as well. Months later, in April of 2002, the unsolved missing person case looked close to getting solved. Detectives in Virginia received word that records of Marcus had been found with a house deed, mailboxes, and utilities in the missing person's name. Marcus had purchased a $2,100 square foot house in Granite Falls, North Carolina, 400 miles from his apartment in Virginia Beach. Little did case investigators know that there were 2 different investigations at this property in Granite Falls. While they were looking to solve a missing person case, special FBI agents were also circling the North Carolina property for a raid of their own. Living in the house was not Marcus Burell, but rather a 31-year-old insurance adjuster named Troy Baudois, who had purchased the home in Marcus's name. FBI agents were investigating Troy because from February of 2000 until November of 2001, he had taken over $200,000 from his job at an insurance company and fled. Between December of 2001 and January of 2002, as FBI agents tried to bring the missing person to justice, they found Troy had obtained 3 DMV identification cards in Marcus's name. He also had a copy of Marcus's birth certificate, and he used this to renew Marcus's passport with his own photo and assume his identity. This is how, in April of 2002, Troy was able to purchase the North Carolina house and signed the documents as Marcus. This is what tipped off investigators in Virginia, who thought that they'd found their missing person. They were unaware that the FBI was building a case on Troy for the insurance scam. In May of 2002, Troy had returned to Virginia Beach and was ready to accept a plea deal for the missing $200,000. But when one of his girlfriends tipped him off that FBI agents had interviewed her about Marcus's disappearance and that he was the main person of interest in a much larger crime investigation, he took his own life in his hotel room the next day. The mysterious disappearance of Marcus Burell has never been solved, and his body has never been found. In July of 2002, police searched Troy's former home in Norfolk, Virginia, with teams of cadaver dogs, but turned up no results. With Troy's demise and the mysterious disappearance of Marcus's roommate, Carl, there have been no further leads on Marcus's unsolved case. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Virginia Beach Police Department at 757-385-4023. Callers should reference case number 2002-002-789. Number 6. This is the mysterious disappearance of Lori Ann Murchison Dunbar, who had bleached blonde hair and a dimple in her cheek that showed when she smiled. The 24-year-old Lori had been bouncing back and forth between Wilburton, Oklahoma, and Fort Smith, Arkansas for some time, before her strange disappearance would go unsolved by the FBI. On September 1st, 1995, Lori and her boyfriend Jerry were arrested during a traffic stop. They were both kept in the county jail overnight for being intoxicated, and the next morning, on September 2nd, Lori was released. She intended to pick up her paycheck from her job at Oaks Lodge Nursing Home, cash it, and return to the jail to bail Jerry out. She picked up a key to a motel room sometime between 2 and 4 p.m., then made plans with her mother to pick up her 4-year-old daughter the next day. But she never picked up her paycheck or returned to the jail. On September 5th, Lori's mother reported her as a missing person case. Police followed a number of potential crime leads, even going so far as to dig up a plot of land near her motel during their search, but unfortunately found no evidence to solve what happened to Lori. In 2000, a new crime detective wanted to see her cold case solved and started working on a theory that her body had been hidden by someone she was partying with. But these speculations were unfounded, and the case went cold until 5 years later. In 2005, FBI agents took over and began an investigation into a person of interest by the name of Ron Fields. In 1995, Ron Fields was the prosecuting attorney for Arkansas's 12th Judicial District. He held that post for nearly 20 years and eventually moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked for the DEA and the Department of Homeland Security. Because he was a public official, when he came under suspicion, the FBI had jurisdiction to investigate. Though the details have never been released to the public, Ron was accused by anonymous sources of collaborating with a former Fort Smith police captain to end Lori's life and hide her missing body. In 2005, the case was brought before a grand jury in Washington, D.C., where the case remained unsolved due to a lack of evidence. Whether or not Ron played a role in Lori's disappearance has never been proven to be a true story. As recently as 2014, an FBI spokesperson simply told reporters that the agency could not comment on any crime cases, pending or otherwise. Anyone with information about Lori's case should reach out to the Fort Smith Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division at 479-709-5116. Number 5. As anyone will tell you, there isn't anything a parent wouldn't do for their children, including never leaving them behind. As a single mother, 26-year-old Patricia Wagner lived in New Jersey with her mother, Marie, and her 2 young sons. On October 20th, 1972, Patricia left her children in the care of her mother to go on a coffee date with a man known as Dennis. Before leaving, Patricia's 5-year-old son, named Kenny, had begged his mom not to go out that night. He told his mother and grandmother that he had a bad feeling in his stomach that his mother would never come home. And sadly, his feelings were right. In an attempt to calm her son, Patricia had promised that the 2 of them would go to McDonald's the following day, as something special to look forward to. The next day came, and Marie noticed that Patricia had never come home from her date. She instantly called the police to file a missing person case. Dennis's family also called the police, unknown to Marie. Upon investigating, the man Patricia had been on a date with was reported missing, which his family realized when he failed to pick up his paycheck at work. The police had initially assumed that the 2 had run away together, even though Patricia's family knew in their hearts that she would never leave her sons behind. At the time of the investigation, Patricia's personal items were precisely where she had left them, a sign that she intended to return home. It took convincing for the police to recognize that Patricia, as a stay-at-home mother who occasionally worked as a housekeeper, would not be able to afford to disappear, as she had no income or savings. Nonetheless, Patricia's case continued to go unsolved. In 2020, when Patricia's cousin, Aileen Mihalko, who had continued to search for answers and justice for her cousin and other victims like her, managed to locate Dennis using the internet, showing that he was alive and healthy living in Florida. But when Aileen and other family members attempted to get in touch with Dennis regarding Patricia's disappearance, he refused to talk about it. The information was passed along to the New Jersey State Police, but there's been no further movement in the case. Anyone with information on Patricia's case is urged to contact the New Jersey State Police at 606-882-2000. Patricia's case number is H66-02019. 00023. Number 4. Another scary dating horror story is the disappearance of 20-year-old Heather Elvis, who'd been living on her own for the first time in 2013 while working at the local Tilted Kilt in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and studying to be a cosmetologist. During her employment at the Tilted Kilt, Heather entered an affair with a married man named Sidney Moore, who she met online. It was by no means kept secret, and only a matter of time until Sidney's wife, Tammy Moore, would catch on. During her shifts, Heather's female coworkers would tease and poke fun at Heather for her unconventional relationship. One day, the teasing had gone as far as a few girls calling the restaurant, pretending to be Tammy Moore, wanting to speak with Heather. But when Tammy Moore eventually discovered the affair, the situation turned in a creepy and terrifying direction, an ultimately scary story. Upon finding out about the affair, Tammy Moore made her husband end the relationship over the phone before confiscating his phone. She also allegedly forced her husband to tattoo her name on him and handcuff him to their bed at night. Not long after the phone prank at the restaurant, Tammy Moore called the restaurant and confronted Heather over the phone. From then on, Tammy Moore would call the Tilted Kilt for hours on end, non-stop, just to harass and belittle Heather. Soon after, the situation escalated when Tammy sent Heather pictures and videos from Sidney's phone of him and Tammy performing intimate acts. Tammy aimed to make Heather believe that Sydney was only interested in her as a booty call. By December, though, there was still little to no contact between Heather and Moore, and Heather was looking forward to moving on with her life. On November 19, 2013, the Moores left town, claiming to reconcile their marriage. Heather was living her life, which continued moving on from Sydney. But Heather's coworkers started to notice that Heather was gaining weight quickly. They believed she may have been pregnant with Sydney Moore's baby. Continuing with her life, Heather went on a date with a man named Steve Schiraldi on December 17, who claimed to have dropped Heather off at home just after 1 a.m. But on December 19th, the local police responded to a call about a suspicious vehicle that was abandoned at the Peachtree boat landing near Myrtle Beach. The vehicle found was a green Dodge Intrepid, and it belonged to Heather Elvis. Upon inspection of the vehicle, Heather's father had at first assumed that the vehicle was stolen. The doors to the vehicle were locked, and neither Heather nor her personal belongings were anywhere to be found. During the initial investigation into Heather's disappearance, the police were advised to talk with Sydney Moore, who had successfully played off his interview as he was interested in moving on from Heather and that he wanted zero contact with her since ending their relationship. There was no official proof of a crime, no blood, no signs of trouble, and no broken glass on site. Police officials did not believe that this was a case of foul play at first, but later evidence pointed towards Sydney and his wife. After looking through Heather's phone records, investigators noticed that in Heather's last active hours, she'd received a phone call from a payphone at around 1:30 in the morning. After talking for a few moments, Heather tried to call that payphone 9 more times before she began her drive to Peachtree boat landing. Heather had called her best friend and roommate, Brianna Kulzer, hysterical after her phone call with Sydney, claiming he was leaving his wife for her. Heather was warned about meeting up with him so late at night. After the conversation, Brianna believed that Heather wasn't going to meet Sydney that evening. The evidence began stacking up against Sydney and his wife. Today, both Tammy and Sydney Moore are serving 2 consecutive 30-year sentences for the kidnapping, conspiracy to kidnap, and obstruction of justice. Heather still has not been heard from or seen to this day, and remains a missing person. If anyone has any information about Heather Elvis, you're asked to contact the Myrtle Beach Police Department at 843-918-1300. Number 3. Deborah Feldman was a troubled woman with a dark past when she went missing in 2009, after returning home on the evening of April 9th, believed to be with an unidentified man who she met online. Later that night, Deborah disappeared from her apartment, never to be seen again. As the police had no evidence to go on, the case went cold and was shut down as just another missing person case. 5 years after her disappearance, police and the FBI learned that Deborah may have been a victim of a recently caught mass killer, Israel Keyes, who'd been called the most meticulous serial killer of modern times by Slate Online magazine. Deborah had been described by her family as a kind woman who was a deeply troubled addict. It's also believed that she may have been a street worker for drug money. Keyes was no stranger to street workers and often found them as his next victim, or so he would later claim. Keyes took his own life in prison in 2013, leaving police and Deborah's family desperate for answers. Before taking his own life, Keyes had an interview in which police would find reason to suspect that Deborah was, in fact, one of his victims when he was passing through the East Coast in 2009. During the interview, FBI officers put photos in front of Keyes, one by one, trying to identify his victims. But with every new image was the same answer, no, until a photo of Deborah Feldman was put in front of him. Officers claim he hesitated and waited before responding, "I don't want to talk about her yet." Selfishly, Keyes took his own life just hours later. Police believe that Feldman may be one of Keyes' victims. Although he told officers he'd abducted a woman on the East Coast on April 9th of 2009, the same day Feldman was reported last seen, nobody knows if it was Deborah or not. Deborah's body has still not been found. If anyone has information about Deborah or her whereabouts before her disappearance, you're urged to call the Hackensack Police Department at 201-646-7777 or the FBI at 800-225-5324. Her case number is 090-7702. Number 2. Irene Gaaka is a 32-year-old immigrant from Kenya who came to the United States to take advantage of the country's educational offers in May of 2019. The 32-year-old woman is described as a free spirit who's caring, goofy, and likes to go with the flow. Unknown to Gaaka's family, the young woman was dating and living with the man Nathan Heitman, whom she met online in a Craigslist forum 6 months before becoming a missing person who was never found. During her last video chat with her parents on February 24th, her father commented on how hungry and tired she looked, noticing that her smile was not as vibrant as usual. Her father also noticed that her typical short braided hair was rumpled and very unlike her usual style. When Irene began missing scheduled video calls with her family, her parents began receiving strange messages on their WhatsApp. It was almost like someone was typing the conversation into Google Translate. Some of the messages were excuses as to why Irene couldn't video call with her family, and other messages went unanswered, leaving Irene's family worried. The whole situation felt unnatural and very unlike Irene again, leading her brother to file a missing person report. According to Nathan Heitman, Irene had come home late around the end of February, packed her clothing into 2 plastic bags and left in a dark-colored SUV. But Irene's family does not believe the story, as it doesn't sound like something their daughter would do. After she disappeared, Irene's boyfriend transferred money from her account into his, changed all of her online banking passwords, maxed out her credit cards, and deleted her email account. Later, he claimed the only reason he took the money out of her account was so that when she needed it and couldn't access it, she'd be forced to call him. Later, during the investigation, the FBI publicly announced that the search had started for a 55-gallon metal drum that was somehow related to the case. At first, the police declined to say why they were interested in the drum and what it could contain. Still, a neighbor of Heitman claimed to have witnessed a fire burning in a drum in Heitman's backyard around late February when Irene's parents last heard from her, and March when the police report was officially filed. The search for Irene is still ongoing, and the next search is scheduled on September 24th. If anyone has information about Irene Gaaka or her whereabouts, you're asked to contact the Gillette Police Department at 307-682-5155. Irene's case number is MP90106. Number 1. Living up to an actual online dating horror story, the disappearance of 43-year-old Leslie Ben Esau has left the world and her family searching endlessly for the woman who vanished after going on a date with the person she'd met using the dating app OkCupid. On the morning of April 15, 2022, Leslie told her sisters about the date, planned for later that day, and was excited about it. She said that she would keep in touch and let them know how it went. As the day went on, her sisters grew concerned that they hadn't heard anything, but brushed it off until later the next day. The next day just happened to be Leslie's 43rd birthday. Her sisters grew worried as they began to realize Leslie's phone was off and her online birthday wishes went unread. Both of her sisters claimed that it was unlike Leslie, as she always had her phone on and saw messages even if she didn't respond immediately. During the investigation, Leslie's phone providers were able to inform the police that Leslie's phone had not been used since 8:45 the morning she went missing. It was presumed that Leslie's conversation with her sisters was the last time her phone was used. The day before, Leslie told her sister she was to be picked up at her house by someone who went unnamed, so she could meet her date, Bea, near the Capitol. Upon investigation, police found surveillance footage of Leslie later that day, found outside of an establishment called the Orchid Thai Restaurant and Bar, located in Sacramento, California, before making her way up 16th Street and going towards the University of Beer Bar. This would be the last time anyone had seen Leslie. There's not been much movement on the case, as many facts are still unknown, including the early days of the investigation. The police have stated that there's no indication of foul play in Leslie's disappearance, even though her sisters believe otherwise. If anyone has information on Leslie Ben Esau or her whereabouts, her family, and the Sacramento Police Department, urge you to call 916-808-5471. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.